Washington is leading a coalition of some 20 states in suing the Trump administration, claiming it illegally cut billions in federal disaster protection funding. The program helps communities prepare for natural disasters before they hit. The cities of Hoquiam and Aberdeen learned that they would lose funding to build levees to control and prevent flooding. Joining us now is Washington Attorney General Nick Brown. So, Attorney General, we've already heard things like flood levee projects along the coast are being impacted. What else in our state is at risk because of the shutdown of this program?
Well, there are a number of different programs across the state where local communities have been preparing for a myriad of different types of natural emergencies or disasters that requires both a combination of federal funding and state funding to make sure that communities are ready for whatever the future may hold. And so there's a long list of communities that potentially are going to be impacted by the cuts that were instituted by the federal administration. So we wanted to make sure that we moved quickly to protect some of that, because we never know the types of disasters that might strike in our communities, and we need to be prepared for those moments.
Washington, now part of this multi-state lawsuit. What legal arguments will you make against the Trump administration, and how strong is the state's case?
Well, our case lays out a few different types of claims, but essentially that what we're arguing is that Congress had authorized certain funding to go to the states that were under very specific requirements, and the administrative action by the president to simply eliminate that funding and cancel funding that had been approved by Congress and that the states were relying on was a violation of those federal statutes. And, you know, I understand that the president and the administration might have different priorities and how to spend taxpayer dollars, but they simply cannot ignore what Congress has said and ignore the reliance that states have developed to depend on those funds without passing a new law, without going back to Congress. And you can't simply violate the law because you have a different policy position. So our complaint lays out a few different complaints around that idea, but the central premise is Congress authorized this money. The president simply can't stop it because he has a different priority.
How would the loss of this funding put our state at risk for floods, wildfires, earthquakes?
Well, you know, every season, Washingtonians are rightly concerned about a myriad of different types of natural disasters, some of which are happening, on an emergency basis, some that are building up over time. But we have emergencies in this state, resulting from wildfires that have been ravaging our communities all across Washington now for many years. We have flooding in different areas where we've seen water really have a devastating impact on local communities, particularly those communities along the coastline. And so we want to make sure that Washington is prepared to meet that challenge. We don't want to be in a position where we could have prevented and saved lives had we had this money. And we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that was going to come to Washington and millions more that was going to be distributed to come to counties across the country. And so, I don't want to be in the position a day from now or a year from now where we know that we could have prevented the loss of life or property because we had this money that Congress had authorized for us.
What is your biggest worry, and how confident are you this lawsuit will be successful?
Well, we don't bring a case unless we think we can win. And, we've been successful in the vast majority of our cases thus far, but we always face challenges when we go to court and we get lawyers from the other side arguing. And so we'll have to make sure that we put our best foot forward. I feel confident that our claims are strong, but we'll have to rely on our professional staff and attorneys to continue to advocate on behalf of Washington. I don't like suing the president or the administration. We only do so when we think the action is illegal and harmful to Washington. And this is one of those cases where both of those two things are true. And my biggest fear is that, if we lost this money or we lose this case, that people and property are going to be harmed and hopefully no losses of life. But that is the type of projects that we're talking about, projects that save communities who cannot simply fund these projects with their own budgets or with the state budget.
It's a case we'll follow really closely. Attorney General Nick Brown, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.